Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. The park was always quiet in the evenings, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper. The rustling of leaves, the distant laughter of a child, and the occasional bark of a dog were the only noises that broke the silence. I walked the same path every night, taking in the crisp air, enjoying the solitude. It was my time to unwind, to escape from the exhaustion of the day. It had started a week ago, the feeling that someone was watching me. At first I thought it was nothing, just a trick of the mind. But then I noticed him always sitting on the same bench near the old oak tree. His posture was relaxed, yet something about him unsettled me. He never did anything, never moved, never spoke. He just sat there, staring in my direction. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. But the next evening, and the one after that, he was there again. And every time I turned to get a second look, he was gone. It wasn't possible. No one could vanish that quickly, not without making a sound. The first few times, I dismissed it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But it kept happening, night after night, without fail. Tonight I decided I would be brave. I would look at him, really look, and see if he reacted. As I entered the park, my heart pounded in my chest. The air was colder than usual, and the path was dimly lit by flickering street lamps. My footsteps felt too loud against the pavement. I saw him immediately, sitting in the same spot. His clothes were dark, his face obscured by the shadows. I slowed my pace, pretending not to notice him at first. But then I turned my head, locking eyes with where I should have been. A chill ran through me. He wasn't just watching. He was staring straight at me as if waiting for something. My breath caught in my throat, and for the first time, fear truly settled in. I took a few hesitant steps forward, feeling the weight of his gaze. Then, just like always, I looked away for a split second, and when I turned back, he was gone. The bench was empty, the space around it undisturbed. There was no sound of movement, no footsteps retreating into the darkness. He had simply disappeared. I walked over to the bench, my pulse hammering. The wood was worn, the paint chipping away from years of exposure to the elements. I reached out and touched it, half expecting it to be cold, but it felt normal. There was no sign that anyone had been sitting there at all. I scanned the park, searching for any sign of him. But the paths were empty, the trees swaying gently in the wind. I was alone. The thought made my skin crawl. If he had walked away, I would have heard it. If he had run, I would have seen him. But there was nothing. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The image of the man burned in my mind, the way he sat so still, the way he vanished without a trace. I told myself I wouldn't go back the next night, but when the evening came, my feet carried me to the park before I could convince myself otherwise. The man was there again. Same bench, same posture. I hesitated before stepping forward, my fingers curling into fists. I wasn't going to let him disappear this time. I was going to catch him. I took a deep breath and walked straight toward the bench. His head tilted slightly as I approached, as if acknowledging my presence. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would echo through the quiet night. I was only a few feet away now. I could see the outline of his face, though it remained hidden in the dim light. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The wind rustled through the trees, but he didn't respond. I swallowed hard and took another step. "Why are you watching me?" Still no answer. but there was something in his posture, something that felt almost familiar. My chest tightened as an eerie sense of recognition crept over me. I didn't know him, and yet something about him felt known. I blinked, and in that single moment he was gone. The space in front of me was empty. The night was silent. My breath caught in my throat as I turned in frantic circles, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. I stumbled back, my skin prickling. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. I had been looking right at him. There was no way he could have disappeared in an instant. The next day, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had been too tired. Maybe my mind had filled in gaps where they didn't exist. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew I had seen something real. And worse, I knew he wasn't finished with me yet. That night, I hesitated before going back. But some force, some deep compulsion drew me there again. The bench was empty at first. I let out a breath, thinking maybe he was finally gone. Then I felt it, the weight of a gaze pressing against my back. I turned around, my blood running cold. He wasn't on the bench anymore. He was standing in the distance, just beyond the reach of the nearest street lamp. For the first time, he had moved. For the first time, he wasn't waiting for me to find him. He was coming closer. Story 2. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling my kitchen as I set it down on the counter. I had barely taken a sip before realizing I had left my phone in the living room. With a sigh, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving the coffee steaming in its mug. It was early, and I needed the caffeine to wake up properly. When I returned a few minutes later, my cup was empty. I stopped mid-step, staring at the cup as my mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The ceramic was still warm to the touch, but not a single drop of coffee remained inside. I frowned, certain I had left it full. My first thought was that maybe I had absent-mindedly drunk it before leaving, but I knew that wasn't the case. I glanced around the kitchen, expecting to see a spill somewhere. Maybe I had knocked it over without realizing it. But the counter was dry, and there was no sign of coffee anywhere. My confusion deepened. There was no one else in the house. The doors were locked, and I lived alone. The only way that coffee could have disappeared was if someone or something had taken it. I picked up the cup and sniffed it, hoping for some clue. The faint scent of coffee lingered, but nothing else seemed out of place. I checked the sink, thinking maybe I had washed it without realizing, but it was empty. The coffee had simply vanished. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired. Maybe I had poured it out absent-mindedly before leaving the kitchen. Shrugging it off, I made another cup and carried it with me this time. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone as I sipped the warm liquid. The taste was strong, reassuringly normal. I told myself I had imagined the earlier incident, that it was just a trick of my groggy morning mind. But somewhere in the back of my head, a lingering unease remained. Later that afternoon, I decided to test something. I brewed another cup, set it on the counter, and left the kitchen again. This time, I made sure to note the time. 5 minutes passed before I returned. When I stepped back inside, my stomach dropped. The cup was empty again. No spills, no evidence of what had happened. Just an eerily vacant mug, as if someone had drained it the moment I left. A shiver crawled down my spine. This wasn't normal. I checked the cabinets and even opened the pantry, half expecting someone to be hiding inside. But I found nothing. My mind raced for logical explanations. Was it a leak in the cup? I picked it up, turning it in my hands, but there were no cracks. Besides, the coffee would have pooled somewhere if that were the case. There was no mess, no stain, nothing. I set the cup down carefully, backing away from the counter. I felt as if I were being watched. though I couldn't explain why. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, as if something unseen lingered just beyond my vision. I stood there for several minutes, waiting for something to happen. But the room remained silent, unchanged. Just an empty cup sitting on the counter. That night, I tried to push the incident from my mind. I told myself I was imagining things, that stress or lack of sleep was making me forget what I had done. But deep down, I knew better. Something strange was happening in my house. As I got ready for bed, I made sure to lock every door and window, though I wasn't sure what I was protecting myself from. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the day over and over. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding for no apparent reason. The room was silent, but I felt an overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I sat up, listening carefully. The house was quiet, but something felt off. I reached for my phone, checking the time, 3:12 a.m. As I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, a soft sound reached my ears. It was coming from the kitchen, a faint clinking, like ceramic touching a hard surface. My stomach twisted as I realized what it was. My coffee cup. I forced myself to move, creeping out of bed and down the hallway. The closer I got to the kitchen, the stronger the unease became. My breath hitched as I peered around the corner. The cup was sitting on the counter, exactly where I had left it. But this time it wasn't empty. Steam rose from inside as if it had just been freshly poured. My pulse pounded in my ears. I hadn't made coffee. I hadn't even stepped foot in the kitchen since dinner. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The cup sat there innocently, the liquid inside dark and undisturbed. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the handle. It was warm. I jerked my hand back, my breath quickening. There was no denying it now. Someone had made this coffee. And it wasn't me. I backed away slowly, unwilling to take my eyes off the cup. The silence in the house felt suffocating. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but my body refused to move. Then, just as I turned to go back to my room, a whisper cut through the stillness. It was soft, barely audible, but it was enough to freeze me in place. My name, spoken by a voice I didn't recognize. I whipped around, my heart hammering against my ribs. The kitchen was empty. There was no one there. But the coffee cup, now completely empty, sat perfectly still on the counter. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room, every light in the house turned on, trying to make sense of what had happened. There was no rational explanation, no way to dismiss it as my imagination. Something was in my house. Something unseen, something watching. And for whatever reason, it had taken an interest in my coffee. By morning, I had made up my mind. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left the house without looking back. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Story 3. I sat alone in my apartment, the glow of the television flickering across the dimly lit living room. The night was quiet, save for the low hum of voices from the screen and the occasional creak of the building settling. I had spent the past hour mindlessly flipping through channels, not really watching anything in particular. The kind of night where time felt sluggish, stretching endlessly without purpose. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. It was firm, deliberate, and closed right at my front door. My body tensed at the sound, my mind quickly cycling through possibilities. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries, no friends stopping by, nothing that would warrant someone being at my door this late. Without hesitation, I got up and crossed the room, my pulse quickening as I reached for the handle. I swung the door open, expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway was empty. I stepped out slightly, looking both ways down the narrow corridor. It was silent. No footsteps retreating, no doors closing in the distance, just the same dimly lit, lifeless hallway. A chill crept down my spine as I stepped back inside and shut the door. Maybe it had been my neighbors messing around, or maybe I had misheard where the knock had come from. Still, something about it didn't sit right with me. The knock had been too clear, too intentional, and yet there was no one there. I tried to brush it off, returning to my spot on the couch, but the unease lingered. My ears tuned in to every little sound, every creak and shuffle in the building. I found myself glancing toward the door more often than necessary, half expecting another knock. Minutes passed, then an hour, and nothing else happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a random occurrence, maybe even my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned off the TV and got ready for bed, shaking off the lingering paranoia. Sleep came slowly, my mind still replaying the knock, the empty hallway, the strange silence that followed. The next night, I stayed up later than usual, half waiting for something to happen. The apartment felt colder than normal, and the shadows in the corners seemed darker, heavier. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling mindlessly, but I kept looking toward the door. It was silly, I told myself. Just a random knock. No reason to be afraid. Then, at exactly the same time as the night before, the knock came again. The same firm, deliberate rhythm, as if whoever was on the other side wanted me to know they were there. My heart pounded as I stared at the door, hesitating this time before moving. I forced myself to stand, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to open it. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty again. No one was there. The air outside felt unnaturally still, the silence pressing against me like a heavy weight. I stepped out farther this time, walking a few steps in each direction, scanning for any sign of movement. Nothing. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. This was different from the first night. This wasn't random. Someone or something was knocking, and they wanted me to know it. The unease that had been lingering in the back of my mind was now fully formed, a deep, gnawing fear settling in my stomach. I barely slept that night, every sound making me jolt awake. The next morning I decided to check with my neighbors. I knocked on the door of the apartment across from mine, an older man who had lived there for years. When he answered, I hesitated before asking, "Did you hear anything weird last night? Like knocking?" He frowned slightly, shaking his head. "No, I didn't hear anything. Everything was quiet as usual." I thanked him and moved on to the next door, but I got the same response. No one had heard anything. No one had seen anything. It was as if the knocks had only existed within the walls of my apartment. That night I stayed awake, waiting. I kept all the lights on, the television playing in the background to fill the silence. Midnight passed. Then 1, then 2. I started to think maybe it wouldn't happen again, that maybe whatever it was had stopped. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., the knock came again. It was louder this time, more insistent. My entire body froze, a cold wave of fear washing over me. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The knock came again, harder. Whoever was on the other side wasn't leaving this time. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera app, turning on the front-facing camera to look through the peephole. The hallway should have been empty. It had been empty every time before. But this time, something stood there. It wasn't a person, not exactly. The shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, its form slightly distorted like a smudge on a mirror. It didn't move. It just stood there facing my door, waiting. My hands shook as I turned off the camera and backed away. My breath came in shallow gasps, my mind racing for a solution. I couldn't open the door. I couldn't move. I could only stand there, trapped in my own apartment with something waiting just outside. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. I waited, straining to hear any sound from the hallway. Nothing. Slowly, I gathered the courage to check the peephole again, but the hallway was empty once more. The presence was gone, but the fear remained. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the apartment, checking into a hotel for a few nights. I couldn't stay there. I didn't want to know what would happen if I did. When I finally returned days later, exhausted and still on edge, I hesitated before unlocking the door. Everything inside was exactly how I left it, except for one thing. A single handprint smeared across the wood of the front door. It was too large, the fingers too long, the shape unnatural. It was a mark, a sign that something had been there. And it wasn't done with me yet. Story 4. I woke up to the sound of humming drifting through the darkness. It was faint but unmistakable, a slow and deliberate tune that sent a chill through me. My first thought was that I had left the television on, but the house had been silent when I went to bed. I lay there for a moment, listening, trying to determine where it was coming from. The longer I listened, the clearer it became it was coming from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs. The house was supposed to be empty. I lived alone, and I had locked all the doors before going to bed. The humming continued, soft and rhythmic, as if someone was standing in my kitchen, swaying to a melody only they knew. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but my hands trembled as I unlocked it. I debated whether to call someone, maybe a friend, maybe the police, but something inside me told me to check first. It was an irrational thought, but I needed to see for myself. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cold floor beneath my feet. The humming continued, unbroken, as if whoever or whatever was making the sound was completely unaware of my presence. I crept toward my bedroom door, holding my breath. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the small nightlight I kept near the stairs. As I stepped forward, the humming stopped. The silence was even worse. It was sudden, unnatural, like the sound had been cut off rather than simply fading away. I stood frozen, waiting for something to happen, but the house remained still. I forced myself to move, stepping cautiously toward the kitchen. Each footstep felt deafening in the silence. When I reached the kitchen door, I hesitated. The air inside felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite explain. I reached for the light switch and flipped it on. The kitchen was empty. Everything was exactly as I had left it before going to bed. The chairs were tucked neatly under the table, the sink was empty, and the back door was still locked. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I had been dreaming, caught in that strange space between sleep and wakefulness. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. The salt shaker on the table had been moved. I was certain it had been near the center, but now it sat at the very edge, as if someone had pushed it. My stomach twisted. It was such a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was enough to send my mind racing. I reached out slowly and picked it up, my fingers gripping it tightly. The ceramic felt ice cold in my hands, colder than it should have been. I placed it back in its original spot and stepped away. I didn't want to be in the kitchen any longer than necessary. I turned off the light and hurried back to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, listening for any other sounds. The house remained silent, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there with me. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the humming to return. It never did, but I felt watched, as if unseen eyes were lingering just beyond my door. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I tried to push the memory aside, chalking it up to stress or an overactive imagination. I went about my routine, making coffee and getting ready for the day, but something felt different. The air in the house seemed heavier, as if the walls were holding onto something unseen. I went back into the kitchen, glancing around with fresh eyes. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I reached for my coffee mug, I noticed something on the table. A single grain of salt sat near the edge. I frowned, brushing it away, but the unease in my stomach grew. That night, I triple-checked the locks before going to bed. I made sure every window was secure, every door bolted shut. I even left a light on in the hallway, something I hadn't done since I was a child. As I climbed into bed, I told myself it was just paranoia, just my mind playing tricks on me. But at exactly 2:47 a.m., the humming returned. This time it was closer. It wasn't coming from the kitchen, it was coming from just outside my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the door, barely able to move. The humming was low, slow, deliberate. It sounded like a lullaby, but the tune was unfamiliar, wrong somehow. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I tried to dial any number, but the second my finger touched the screen, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I strained to hear anything: footsteps, breathing, the creak of a floorboard, but there was nothing. I stayed frozen in bed for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, exhaustion won again, and I must have fallen asleep. When I woke the next morning, I found my bedroom door slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. Over the next few nights, the humming returned at the same time. Each time it grew a little closer. One night I heard it directly outside my bedroom window. Another, it seemed to echo from inside the walls. I started avoiding sleep, staying awake as long as possible, but the lack of rest made everything worse. I saw shadows moving where there were none, heard whispers beneath the humming. I knew I had to leave. I packed a bag and booked a hotel room in the next town over, telling myself I just needed a break, some time to clear my head. But as I sat in the hotel room that night, wrapped in silence, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if it wasn't the house? What if it was following me? I barely slept that night, and when I returned home the next day, the house felt emptier than before. There was no humming, no whispering, nothing out of place. But I knew better. It was still there, waiting. I don't know what it wants, or why it chose me. But every night, just before 2:47 a.m., I hold my breath and listen. And no matter how silent the house may seem, I know the humming will return. Story 5. The shoes were there when I stepped outside one morning, sitting neatly on my porch like they had been placed with intention. They were mismatched. One was a worn brown loafer, the other a white sneaker with scuffed sides. Neither belonged to me, nor to anyone in my house. I stared at them for a long moment, wondering how they got there. Then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. On the inside of the sneaker's tongue, a tag had my name written in black ink. I bent down, hesitating before touching them. The handwriting was familiar, like my own, but slightly off, as if someone had tried to imitate it. A strange unease settled in my chest. Had someone left them here as a joke? I looked around, scanning the yard, the sidewalk, even the street beyond, but there was no sign of anyone. The neighborhood was quiet, the air still, but something about the shoes felt wrong. I nudged the sneaker with the tip of my own shoe, half expecting something to happen. It remained still, just a shoe, yet the presence of it felt heavier than it should. I finally picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The tag with my name was sewn into the fabric, as if it had always been there. But that wasn't possible. I had never seen these shoes before in my life. My heart pounded as I checked the other shoe, but there was nothing unusual about it, just an old loafer with creased leather. Bringing them inside felt like a bad idea, so I left them where they were and went about my morning. But the thought of them lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Why were they here? Who had left them? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was probably just some strange mix-up, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. By the afternoon, the shoes were still there. I had expected them to be gone, for whoever had left them to come back and take them. But they remained untouched, like they belonged there. It made my skin crawl. I grabbed a trash bag, ready to throw them out, but as soon as I picked them up again, a strange sensation washed over me. A dizzying wave of familiarity, like I had seen them before, but in a dream or a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I shook off the feeling and tossed them into the bag. Tying it shut, I walked it out to the garbage bin by the curb and threw it inside. That should have been the end of it. But that night, as I was locking up before bed, I glanced outside and felt my stomach drop. The shoes were back on the porch, placed exactly where they had been that morning. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and stepped out, staring at them in disbelief. I knew I had thrown them away. I had heard the bag land in the bin, had closed the lid myself. And yet here they were, waiting for me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away, my mind racing for an explanation. Maybe someone had taken them out and put them back. But who would do that? And why? My name was still there, written on the tag in that eerie, almost but not quite handwriting. It didn't make sense. I grabbed my phone, hesitating before taking a picture. The camera lens captured them clearly, but somehow it made them feel even more unnatural. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me flinch. I kept checking the front door, half expecting to see movement through the peephole. The air in my house felt heavy, like I wasn't alone. I kept thinking about the shoes, about the way they had come back. Something about them felt deliberate, like someone wanted me to see them. The next morning they were gone. Just as suddenly as they had appeared, they had vanished. I checked the whole porch, the yard, even the garbage bin again, but there was no trace of them. It should have been a relief, but instead I felt worse, because now I had no idea where they had gone or if they would return. Days passed without incident, and I started to convince myself it was over. Maybe it had been some bizarre prank, though I couldn't imagine it would go through such effort. I tried to push it from my mind, but a lingering unease remained. I found myself checking the porch every morning, expecting to see them again. A week later, I woke up to a soft knock at the front door. My stomach twisted as I checked the time, 3:12 a.m. I held my breath, straining to hear anything else. Silence. The knock didn't come again. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. There was nothing there. I hesitated before unlocking the door, every instinct telling me not to, but I needed to know. Slowly I opened it, the night air cold against my skin. The street was empty, the darkness stretching in every direction. And then I looked down. The shoes were back. This time they were positioned differently, pointing toward the door, as if inviting me to step into them. My pulse raced as I backed away, slamming the door shut. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone or something was playing a game with me, and I had no idea what the rules were. I double-checked the locks, my hands shaking, but I knew it didn't matter. Whatever this was, it didn't need doors to reach me. I barely slept, lying awake in a tense silence, waiting for something else to happen. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I hesitated before checking outside again. The shoes were still there, exactly as I had left them. The air felt thick with something unseen, pressing against me like a warning. This time I didn't throw them away. I didn't touch them at all. Instead, I left them there and went about my day, trying to ignore them, trying to pretend they weren't there. But I could feel them, like an itch in the back of my mind, demanding my attention. That night I heard footsteps on the porch. Not the light sound of an animal or the rustle of wind, but deliberate, human steps. Slow, unhurried. My chest tightened as I lay frozen in bed, straining to hear. The steps stopped right outside my door. I couldn't breathe. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, after a long, unbearable pause, I heard the soft scrape of something being moved. And then, silence. The next morning, I checked the porch again. The shoes were gone, but in their place, a single piece of paper lay on the ground. My name was written on it in the same eerie handwriting, and below it 2 words that made my blood run cold. Not yet. Story 6. The sharp ringing of my phone jolted me awake. My room was completely dark except for the faint glow of the screen on my nightstand. I squinted at the time, 3 a.m. My heart pounded as I reached for the phone, seeing the words blocked number displayed across the screen. I hesitated before answering, my mind still foggy from sleep. The moment I pressed the phone to my ear, a heavy silence filled the line. At first I thought it was a prank call, but then I heard its slow, deliberate breathing. It was deep, almost labored, like someone was standing just outside my door, listening. I sat up, my pulse racing, gripping the phone tighter. Hello. My voice came out unsteady, barely more than a whisper. No response, just the same heavy breathing, steady and unbroken, as if the caller was waiting for something. A chill ran through me as I strained to hear any background noise. There was nothing, no static, no muffled voices, just that eerie, rhythmic breathing. I swallowed hard and ended the call, trying to shake off the unease. It was probably just some creep messing with random numbers, I told myself. I placed my phone back on the nightstand and tried to go back to sleep, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. My mind kept replaying the sound of that breathing, the way it filled the silence so completely. I glanced at my phone again, half expecting another call. Nothing. Just the dim glow of the screen fading into darkness. Hours passed before I finally drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up in the morning, the call felt like a distant nightmare. But as I checked my phone, my stomach twisted. The call was still in my recent history, 3 a.m. blocked number. It hadn't been a dream. I tried to shake it off and go about my day, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. At work, I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another call. By the time I got home that evening, the paranoia had settled deep in my chest. I double-checked my locks, making sure every door and window was secure. That night, I forced myself to sleep early, telling myself I was overreacting. But at exactly 3 a.m., my phone rang again. The same blocked number. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen, dread coiling in my stomach. I didn't want to answer, but something compelled me to. I lifted the phone to my ear, my hands shaking. The breathing was there again, slow and deliberate. It sent a wave of cold terror down my spine. I wanted to hang up, but my body felt frozen. Then, Just as I opened my mouth to say something, a voice cut through the silence. "You shouldn't have answered." The voice was low, almost a whisper, but the menace in it was unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. I yanked the phone away and ended the call, my heart hammering in my chest. My entire body was shaking as I stared at the screen, expecting it to ring again. It didn't. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay in bed, every sound in my apartment suddenly feeling amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the wind against the window, it all felt wrong, like I wasn't alone. I turned my phone off, hoping that would be the end of it. The next day, I changed my number. I told myself it was over. But that night, at exactly 3 a.m., my new phone rang. My breath hitched as I saw the blocked number on the screen. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my stomach knotting in fear. I didn't say anything this time. I just listened. The breathing was there, heavier than before, almost eager. I felt sick. My entire body was covered in cold sweat as I gripped the phone tighter. Then, the same voice whispered, "I found you." I threw the phone across the room, my entire body shaking. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't just some sick joke. Whoever was calling me knew I had changed my number, knew exactly where to reach me. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing, but the sheer panic made it impossible. I didn't sleep at all that night. I left every light on, sitting curled up in the corner of my room, waiting for anything to happen. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I called the phone company, desperate for answers. They told me there was no record of the calls. I insisted, telling them about the breathing, the voice, the way the caller always knew how to reach me. But they found nothing. No incoming calls, no logs, nothing. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. That night, I left my phone off completely, hoping to break the cycle. But at exactly 3 a.m., something far worse happened. A knock at my bedroom window. My entire body seized with fear. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. The knock came again, slow and deliberate, like the breathing on the phone. I couldn't move. My entire body was paralyzed as I stared at the window, the curtains shifting slightly as if someone was just outside. My mouth went dry. The air in the room felt impossibly heavy. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I reached for the lamp and turned it on. The room flooded with light, and I held my breath, expecting to see someone standing outside. But the window was empty. The only thing that remained was the faint outline of something on the glass, like the imprint of a hand. I didn't stay in that apartment after that night. I packed my things and left, moving across the city to a different building. I got a new number, threw away my old phone, and did everything I could to disappear. For weeks, nothing happened. No calls, no knocks, no whispers. But I never forgot. Every night at 3 a.m., I would wake up, heart pounding, expecting the phone to ring. It never did. Not until last night. My new phone, my new number, my new home, it didn't matter. At exactly 3 a.m., the screen lit up. Blocked number. Story 7. When I saw the package on my doorstep, I felt a flicker of excitement. I had been waiting for this delivery for over a week, and finally it had arrived. But as I bent down to pick it up, something felt off. The tape along the edges had been cut and haphazardly resealed, leaving jagged lines along the flaps. A strange feeling settled in my stomach as I carried it inside, my hands tightening around the cardboard. I set the package on the kitchen table and took a deep breath. Maybe it had been checked by customs or tampered with during transit. Still, I hesitated before opening it. a gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. Carefully, I peeled away the tape and unfolded the box flaps, expecting to see the item I had ordered. Instead, my breath hitched as I stared at what lay inside. A single black and white photograph sat at the bottom of the box. It was grainy, slightly curled at the edges, and unmistakably a picture of my front door. My blood ran cold as I turned it over, searching for any explanation, but the back was blank. My order was missing, replaced with this unsettling image. I forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat as I glanced toward the very door captured in the photo. A shiver crawled down my spine as I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a prank, some cruel joke from a delivery worker, or a mix-up at the warehouse. I checked the shipping label, but my name and address were correct. The box had my order number, confirming it was meant for me. The more I stared at the photo, the more a heavy silence seemed to settle around me. I picked up my phone and called the company I had ordered from. The customer service representative sounded confused as I explained the situation. "That doesn't make any sense," she said after a pause. "According to our records, your package was sealed properly when it left our facility. Are you sure the item isn't inside?" I double-checked, shaking out the empty box, but there was nothing else. Feeling a mix of frustration and dread, I decided to contact the delivery service. The representative on the other end of the line was just as perplexed as the first. "We have a record of your package being delivered without issue," they said. "No reports of tampering." I hung up, unsettled by the lack of answers. If neither the retailer nor the courier could explain this, then who had altered my package? I examined the photo again, my pulse quickening as a new thought dawned on me. If someone had taken this picture, it meant they had been standing outside my home, watching. I rushed to the front window and peered outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The street looked normal, quiet, empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there recently, close enough to capture this image. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house made my body stiffen, my mind racing with possibilities. Was someone playing a game with me? Was I being watched even now? I checked the locks on my doors and windows twice before finally collapsing onto the couch, but even then, sleep refused to come easily. The next morning, I decided to install a security camera above my front door. If someone came near my home again, I wanted proof. As I set it up, I couldn't help but glance around my street, searching for anything unusual. A few neighbors walked by, a jogger passed in the distance, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the paranoia tightening around my chest. Days passed, and nothing happened. No new packages, no strange figures lurking outside, no signs of disturbance. I began to convince myself that it had just been an isolated, unsettling incident. Maybe a prank, maybe a mistake. But just as I was starting to let my guard down, I received another package. This one was smaller, lighter, but it bore my name and address just the same. My stomach twisted as I brought it inside. The tape was perfectly intact this time, no sign of tampering. Still, my hands trembled as I cut it open, my breath catching in my throat. Inside was another black and white photograph. This time it was a picture of my living room. Panic surged through me as I whipped my head around, scanning every corner of the room. The furniture, the lighting, everything matched the photo exactly. Whoever had taken this picture had been inside my home. My legs felt weak as I stumbled backward, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I had checked the locks. I had made sure the windows were secure, but someone had still managed to get in. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. An officer arrived shortly after, taking my statement and examining the photographs. They found no signs of forced entry, No fingerprints other than mine. We'll patrol the area for the next few nights, the officer assured me. But keep your doors locked and call us if anything else happens. That night, I barely moved from my spot on the couch, my eyes fixed on the security camera feed. Every shadow outside made my pulse spike. Every faint sound sent my nerves into overdrive. The thought of someone slipping in and out of my home without a trace made my skin crawl. I couldn't stay here, not knowing who was watching me, who had been inside. I made the decision to stay with a friend for a while, at least until I could figure out what to do next. Packing a bag, I took one last look at my house before locking the door behind me. The air outside felt thick with an invisible weight, a presence I couldn't see but could still feel. I tried to shake the feeling as I drove away, but deep down I knew this wasn't over. A few days later, my friend knocked on my bedroom door with a concerned expression. "You got another package," she said, holding a small box in her hands. My stomach twisted as I took it from her, my fingers numb as I peeled back the tape. Inside was a single black and white photograph. It was a picture of my friend's house. Story 8. The building was nearly empty when I arrived, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly as I made my way to the elevator. It was late, much later than I intended to stay at work, but the project had taken longer than expected. I pressed the button and waited, shifting the weight of my bag on my shoulder. The doors slid open, revealing an empty elevator, just as I expected at this hour. I stepped inside, pressing the button for my floor before leaning against the back wall. The doors closed with a quiet hiss, and the elevator began its slow ascent. I exhaled, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. I glanced at the reflective metal panel above the buttons, not expecting to see anything out of the ordinary. But the moment I looked up, my breath caught in my throat. The reflection showed people standing behind me, their figures motionless and silent. My heart pounded as I turned sharply, but the elevator was empty. The walls were bare, nothing but my own reflection staring back at me. I forced myself to look up again, and the figures remained, their faces blurred but unmistakably human. A cold fear prickled down my spine as I studied the reflections. There were at least 4 of them, their bodies rigid, their heads tilted slightly as if watching me. Their eyes dark, hollow shapes were fixed on me, unblinking. My breathing became shallow as I turned in circles, trying to convince myself it was some kind of trick of the lighting. But no matter how I moved, the figures remained, their reflections shifting as if they were truly there. The elevator shuddered slightly as it passed another floor, the light overhead flickering once before steadying. I pressed myself against the wall, pulse hammering in my ears. I tried to slow my breathing, reasoning with myself. Maybe I was imagining it, maybe I was overtired. But my instincts told me otherwise. I forced myself to stay calm, focusing on the floor numbers as they climbed higher. The elevator was nearly at my floor, and then I could step out, leave whatever this was behind. But as I looked up one last time, something changed. One of the figures had moved closer, its blurred face just behind my shoulder. I stumbled forward, my hands shaking as I hit the button for the next available floor, desperate to get out. The elevator slowed, then stopped with a faint chime. The doors slid open, revealing an empty hallway bathed in dim lighting. I hesitated, glancing back at the reflection. The figures were still there, standing motionless, their faces now clearer. Their features were distorted, stretched in an unnatural way, mouths slightly open as if whispering. I bolted out of the elevator, nearly tripping as I crossed the threshold. The moment my feet hit the carpeted floor, the doors began to close behind me. I turned just in time to see the reflection shift. The figures inside moved, stepping forward as the doors slid shut, their expressions unreadable. The elevator continued upward, taking them with it. I stood in the empty hallway, trying to catch my breath. My hands trembled as I ran them over my face, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The air felt thick, the silence stretching unnaturally long. I glanced at the elevator panel on the wall, watching the numbers blink as the elevator ascended higher. A cold realization settled over me. Something had been in there with me, but it had only existed in the reflection. I turned away, forcing myself to move, to put distance between me and the elevator. My office was only a few doors down, and I hurried toward it, needing the safety of a familiar space. As I fumbled with my keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. The figures had been staring at me, unmoving. I had never seen anything like it before. I stepped inside my office, shutting the door behind me with more force than necessary. My hand still shook as I locked it, as if that could somehow keep whatever I had seen at bay. I leaned against my desk, inhaling deeply, willing myself to calm down. Maybe it had been a trick of the mind, a combination of exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. My gaze drifted to the large window that overlooked the city below. The streets were nearly empty, the occasional headlights passing in the distance. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but I didn't feel safe. The reflection in the elevator had been too clear, too real, and the worst part was that they had been watching only me. I stayed in my office longer than I should have, hesitant to leave, reluctant to step back into the hallway, but I couldn't stay there forever. Eventually I would have to go home. I just needed to avoid the elevator. The stairs were an option, even if it meant descending multiple flights alone in the dark. Anything was better than stepping back into that enclosed space. I gathered my things, mentally preparing myself for the walk down. I cracked open the door, glancing both ways. The hallway was silent, the lights dimmer than I remembered. My heart pounded as I stepped out, the quiet pressing in around me. I moved quickly, heading straight for the stairwell, my footsteps the only sound echoing through the corridor. As I reached for the stairwell door, I hesitated. Something felt off. The air was too still, too expectant. Slowly, I turned my head toward the elevator at the end of the hall. The doors were partially open, stuck as if caught mid-motion. Inside, the dim light flickered, casting long shadows, and in the reflective surface I saw them. The figures were still there, standing inside, waiting. But this time their faces were turned toward me, their dark eyes locked onto mine. My breath hitched as I realized something else. They were closer than before, and their mouths were moving, whispering words I couldn't hear. I didn't wait. I yanked open the stairwell door and ran, my footsteps echoing as I took the stairs two at a time. The heavy silence of the building pressed in around me, and I could feel it, that presence, that weight of unseen eyes watching from above. I didn't stop, didn't dare to look back. I just kept running. The memory of those hollow faces burned into my mind. When I finally reached the ground floor, I burst through the exit and into the cool night air. My chest heaved as I looked back at the building, at the darkened windows staring down at me. The elevator was still moving, its path unknowable. I never took that elevator again. Even in the days that followed, I couldn't bring myself to step inside it. But sometimes, as I passed by in the hallway, I would glance at the metal doors, half expecting them to open, half expecting to see those figures waiting inside. And in the polished reflection of the surface, I always had the terrible feeling that they were still watching. Story 9. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards as I shifted my weight. I had been curled up on the couch, half watching an old movie, my mind drifting as the night stretched on. It was the kind of evening I enjoyed, quiet, uneventful, just me and the dim glow of the television. But then, somewhere in the hallway, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps. At first, I thought I had imagined it, the noise blending into the background of the movie soundtrack. But as I muted the TV, the sound became clearer, measured, deliberate steps moving across the wooden floor. My body tensed, my heart pounding harder as I listened. It was impossible. I was alone. I had locked the doors, checked the windows, made sure everything was secure before settling in for the night. I stood slowly, my breath caught in my throat, straining to hear. The footsteps weren't frantic or hurried. They were slow, careful, like someone was moving through the house with purpose. I reached for my phone on the coffee table, gripping it tightly as I turned my gaze toward the hallway. The lights were off, but the faint glow from the street lamp outside cast just enough illumination to show that no one was there. I took a hesitant step forward, every instinct in me screaming to stay put, but I had to check. I had to prove to myself that there was nothing there, that my mind was playing tricks on me. My feet were nearly silent against the carpet as I moved toward the hallway. The footsteps had stopped now, and the house had returned to its unsettling stillness. I flicked on the hallway light, hoping to find it empty. It was. I checked the front door first, testing the lock, feeling a small wave of relief when I found it secured. Then I moved through the rooms one by one, flipping on lights as I went. The kitchen was empty, the back door still locked. The bathroom, the spare bedroom, the small office, nothing. It wasn't until I reached my own bedroom that a fresh wave of unease settled over me. The closet door was open, just slightly, barely noticeable, but I knew for a fact that I had left it closed. I stood frozen in the doorway, every nerve in my body alert, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles ached. The air in the room felt different, heavier, as if someone had been there moments before. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward, to push the door open the rest of the way. Empty. Clothes hung neatly in their places, shoes lined up along the floor. Nothing was disturbed, but I knew something was off. I backed out of the room, my skin crawling as I switched off the light and shut the door behind me. The thought of staying in there alone for the night sent a shiver through me. I decided I would sleep on the couch instead, keep the lights on, let the TV play until morning. As I stepped back into the living room, I heard it again, footsteps, this time from behind me. I spun around so fast that my vision blurred, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway was empty, just as I had left it seconds before. But the sound had been there, clear as day, like someone had been following right behind me. I felt a pressure in my chest, the undeniable weight of fear settling deep in my bones. I moved quickly, nearly stumbling as I reached for the nearest light switch, bathing the entire room in brightness. I stood there for a moment, waiting, listening, my pulse hammering in my ears. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to think logically. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe it was an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night horror movies. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The atmosphere had shifted. The once familiar comfort of my home now tainted by something unseen. I grabbed the blanket off the couch and wrapped it around myself, sinking down onto the cushions. The TV remained on, the muted voices of actors filling the room, breaking the suffocating silence. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I would wake up in the morning and laugh at my paranoia. Sleep didn't come easily. Every small noise, every creak, every whisper of the wind outside made my body tense, my ears straining to catch anything out of the ordinary. At some point, exhaustion must have won, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the curtains. For a brief moment I felt relief until I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hallway light was off. I had left it on, I was certain of it. I stared at the darkened space, my heart hammering against my ribs, dread curling in the pit of my stomach. Someone had turned it off. Someone had been there while I slept. I slowly sat up, scanning the room for any other signs that something had changed, that someone had been moving through my house in the night. Everything else seemed untouched. The doors were still locked, the windows closed, nothing was out of place. But that light, it was proof that I wasn't imagining things. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone, my mind racing through possibilities. I could call someone, but what would I say? That I heard footsteps and a light switch had been turned off. No one would take that seriously. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic, trying to force myself to think rationally. Maybe there was some kind of electrical issue. Maybe the bulb had burned out, though the switch being flipped was harder to explain. I stood slowly, hesitant to move toward the hallway, but knowing I couldn't just sit there forever. I needed to see for myself. I flipped the switch, and the light came back on instantly. No burnt-out bulb, no sign of a malfunction. My skin prickled with unease as I stepped back, resisting the urge to run straight out of the house. The thought crossed my mind to stay somewhere else, a hotel, a friend's place, anywhere but here. But a part of me refused to let fear chase me out of my own home. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to shake off the dread that clung to me like a second skin. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was making too much of it. But as I moved through the house one last time, checking every lock, every room, I couldn't ignore the lingering feeling that I had not been alone last night. Something had been there, and worse, it had been watching. Story 10. I shut the bathroom door firmly behind me, hearing the quiet click of the latch as it settled into place. A few minutes later, when I returned to grab a towel, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. At first, I assumed I hadn't closed it properly, brushing off the thought with a shrug. I pulled it shut again, making sure this time that it was securely latched. Later that evening, I went back to the bathroom and again found the door open. A strange unease settled over me, but I rationalized it away. Maybe the latch wasn't catching properly, or perhaps there was a draft moving through the house. Still, I couldn't recall it ever happening before, and the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Determined to put my mind at ease, I tested the door several times. I closed it firmly, jiggled the handle, and even pressed against it to ensure it was properly shut. Each time it remained closed, but the moment I left the room and returned, the door was open again. The latch was still in working order, and there was no logical explanation for what was happening. I started to pay closer attention, watching the door out of the corner of my eye whenever I passed by. Each time I closed it, I made sure to listen for the sound of the latch clicking into place. Yet without fail, I would return minutes later to find it slightly open. It wasn't wide open, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness beyond the frame, as if someone had nudged it, just enough to let me know it wasn't staying closed. One night I decided to test it more thoroughly. I shut the door and propped a heavy book against it, certain that if it moved again, I would hear the book slide against the floor. I went back to my room, forcing myself to focus on anything else to avoid the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. 20 minutes later, I walked back to check. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the book lying inches away from the door, and the door itself was open just as before. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at the doorway. I lived alone, and I had no pets that could have pushed it open. The house was silent, but I could feel something different in the air, a heaviness that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that maybe the book had simply shifted due to some subtle vibration in the house. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The following night, I placed my phone on a shelf just outside the bathroom and set it to record. If the door opened again, I would have proof of whatever was happening. I shut the door carefully, making sure it was fully latched before walking away. My heart pounded as I sat in my bedroom, waiting for time to pass. After about an hour, I retrieved my phone with shaky hands and played back the footage. The video started normally, the door standing still in the dim hallway light. Minutes passed with nothing happening, and I started to feel silly for even attempting this. But then, at exactly 47 minutes in, the door creaked open slowly, as if someone was pushing it from the other side. There was no draft, no movement anywhere else in the frame. The door simply opened. I rewound the footage and watched it again, hoping to catch some mistake, some logical explanation. But each time it played out the same way. My stomach twisted in knots as I stared at the screen, feeling colder by the second. I suddenly felt as though I wasn't alone, that something unseen was lingering just beyond my line of sight. Determined to understand what was happening, I started researching the house's history. I had lived there for only a couple of years and hadn't thought much about its past. What I found made my blood run cold. Decades ago, a woman named Eleanor had lived in the house. The records were vague, but I managed to track down an old newspaper article. It mentioned her name in connection with an accident. She had died in the house, in the bathroom, after slipping and hitting her head against the sink. The article mentioned something strange. Neighbors had reported hearing knocking and seeing the bathroom door move on its own for years after her passing. Some had even claimed to hear whispers in the hallway late at night. I sat frozen, the words on the screen blurring together as my mind struggled to process what I had just read. Was Eleanor still here? Was she the one opening the door? That night, I felt an oppressive stillness settle over the house. Every small noise made me flinch. Every shadow in the dim hallway seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. I closed the bathroom door again, this time speaking aloud. Eleanor, if you're here, I don't mean any harm. I just want to understand. Nothing happened at first. The silence stretched so long that I almost laughed at myself for expecting a response. But just as I turned to walk away, a soft creaking filled the air. My breath hitched as I turned back and saw the door slowly swinging open. My pulse pounded in my ears as I took a hesitant step forward, peering into the darkness of the bathroom. It felt colder inside, the air thick with something unseen. From that night on, I stopped trying to keep the door closed. Each time it opened, I acknowledged it with a quiet nod, as if silently greeting Eleanor. And strangely enough, the more I accepted it, the less unsettled I felt. The door still opened every time I used the bathroom, but now, it felt less like an intrusion and more like a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. One evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A faint, blurry figure standing just beyond the doorway. It was only there for a second before fading into the shadows, but I knew what I had seen. I met my own reflection, forcing myself to stay calm. "Good night, Eleanor," I whispered, feeling a chill run down my spine. I turned off the bathroom light and stepped out into the hallway. Behind me, the door creaked softly, just as it always did, opening on its own. This time, I didn't look back. Story 11. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, its surface slightly yellowed with age. My name was written in careful, looping script, but there was no return address, No postage stamps, nothing to indicate where it had come from. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the texture of the paper, old and brittle beneath my fingertips. A strange unease settled in my stomach as I carefully peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the edges frayed as if it had been handled many times before. The ink was dark, the characters flowing in elegant but unfamiliar strokes. I scanned the letter, searching for anything recognizable, but the symbols meant nothing to me. It wasn't any language I had ever seen, and yet something about it felt oddly familiar. I set the letter down, my fingers lingering over the strange writing. Who had sent this to me, and why? I flipped the envelope over again, hoping to find some hidden clue, but it remained as blank as before. A chill ran through me, a quiet whisper at the back of my mind telling me that this wasn't just some misplaced letter. The paper smelled faintly of dust and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture, thinking maybe I could find a translation online. But when I searched, nothing even remotely similar appeared. The closest matches were ancient scripts, languages long dead, spoken by civilizations lost to time. I reread the letter, my eyes tracing the foreign symbols as if staring long enough would make them make sense. A headache pulsed behind my temples, and a strange sensation crawled over my skin. The words felt heavy, as if they carried meaning I wasn't meant to understand. I shook my head and tucked the letter back into the envelope, telling myself I would look into it tomorrow. That night, I dreamt of voices whispering in a language I didn't know, their words curling around me like smoke. I stood in a vast, dark space, the sound of rustling paper filling the silence. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, shifting and reforming as if trying to take shape. When I woke, my room was freezing, the air thick with something unseen. The letter was still on the table where I had left it, but now it looked different. The ink, once dark and fresh, had faded as if it had aged overnight. The symbols seemed distorted, almost as if they had moved. My breath hitched, and I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. I knew without a doubt that something was wrong. I decided to take the letter to someone who might know more. A professor at the university specialized in ancient languages, and although I felt ridiculous, I emailed him the picture, hoping for some kind of answer. A reply came within an hour, but it wasn't what I expected. "Where did you find this?" was all it said. No greeting, no signature, just those 5 words. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I tried to figure out how to respond. Before I could type anything, another email arrived. "Do not read it aloud." A chill ran through me as I stared at the screen. I hadn't even thought about reading it out loud, but now the warning made my skin crawl. I quickly typed back, asking what the letter said, who had written it, and why it was addressed to me. Minutes passed, then an hour. No response came. I couldn't sit still. I needed answers. I grabbed my jacket, tucked the letter into my pocket, and left for the university. The building was mostly empty, the halls echoing with my hurried footsteps. When I reached the professor's office, I knocked, but there was no answer. The door was slightly ajar, and against my better judgment, I pushed it open. The office was a mess. Papers were strewn across the desk. Books lay open on the floor, and the air smelled of dust and ink. A single lamp flickered in the corner, casting long shadows against the walls. My eyes landed on a stack of papers covered in symbols similar to those on my letter. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer. A single phrase was scrawled over and over on one of the sheets, the handwriting frantic and uneven. "It knows." The word sent a bolt of fear through me, and I turned, ready to leave. But then my eyes caught something else. The professor's laptop was still open, An unsent email displayed on the screen. If you have received the letter, it is already too late. Burn it. Do not keep it. Do not try to translate it. And above all, do not speak the words aloud. They are listening. My hands trembled as I reached for my pocket. The letter felt heavier now, as if something inside it had shifted. The whispers from my dream echoed in my mind, their voices growing louder. I needed to get rid of it. Now. I rushed out of the office, nearly running as I made my way back home. The sky had darkened, thick clouds hanging low as the wind picked up. My fingers tightened around the envelope, my pulse quickening with each step. The moment I got inside, I grabbed a lighter and headed to the fireplace. The flame caught the edge of the paper, curling it into blackened ash. As the fire consumed the letter, a sharp whisper filled the air, rising in intensity until it became a shriek. The room trembled, the shadows stretching unnaturally against the walls. My breath came in short gasps as the final piece of paper crumbled into embers, and then silence. The air felt lighter, the weight on my chest easing as if something had finally released me. My hands shook as I backed away from the fireplace, my heart still racing. I didn't know what I had just destroyed, and I didn't want to find out. Whatever had been inside that letter, it was never meant to be read. The next morning I checked my email, half expecting another message from the professor. There was nothing. I searched for his name online, but it was as if he had never existed. His university page was gone, his publications erased. Every trace of him had vanished. I never received another letter. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers in a language I cannot understand, carried on the wind like a forgotten memory. And I know, even though the letter is gone, they are still listening. Story 12. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a screen lighting up the dark room. I blinked, barely awake, and reached for it, squinting at the notification. A single message from an unknown number read, "Are you alone?" My grogginess faded instantly, replaced by a cold wave of unease. I sat up, staring at the screen, my heart beginning to pound. It was midnight exactly, the kind of hour when messages like this felt even more unsettling. I tapped on the sender's details, hoping for a name or some clue, but there was nothing. No contact name, no past messages, just a blank entry. I swallowed, glancing around my dark bedroom. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wood settling. A part of me wanted to ignore the message and go back to sleep, but another part couldn't shake the eerie feeling it left behind. Who would send something like that? After a few moments, I decided to respond. "Who is this?" I typed, hesitating before hitting send. The message delivered instantly, but there was no reply. I waited, my phone still in my hand, watching the screen for any sign of typing. Nothing, just the quiet hum of the night pressing in around me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a wrong number, a prank, or some automated spam. But something about it felt too direct, too intentional. I checked my windows, making sure they were locked, then peeked out into the hallway. Everything was still, just as I had left it before bed. Minutes passed, and just as I was about to set my phone down, it buzzed again. Another message from the same number. "Are you sure?" My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a chill run through me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure if I should reply. I felt watched, though I knew that was impossible. Still, the urge to check every corner of my house was overwhelming. I slipped out of bed, my feet moving soundlessly across the hardwood floor as I made my way to the living room. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I hesitated before pulling one side of the curtain back, just enough to glance outside. The street was empty. No cars, no movement, just the quiet stillness of the neighborhood at night. I let the curtain fall back into place, my fingers tight around my phone. I typed out a response, my hands unsteady. "Who are you? What do you want?" The message sent, but once again there was no reply. I sat on the couch staring at the screen, waiting for anything to happen, but the phone stayed silent. After a while, I convinced myself it was a joke, some random person messing with me. I locked my phone, tossing it onto the couch beside me. I needed to sleep. This was just paranoia getting the better of me. With a deep breath, I stood up, ready to head back to bed. The moment I turned, my phone vibrated violently against the couch cushion. The sudden noise made me jump, my pulse spiking. I snatched it up, my stomach twisting. Another message had appeared, and this time it sent ice through my veins. "Look outside." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to pretend I had never even seen the text. My fingers gripped the phone tightly as I debated what to do. The idea of looking out the window again filled me with dread, but the curiosity was unbearable. Slowly, I turned back to the window, my breath shallow. I pulled the curtain aside just an inch, peeking through. My stomach dropped. A figure stood across the street, just outside the glow of the street lamp. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing my house. I let the curtain fall instantly, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands shook as I clutched my phone, my mind racing through every possible explanation. It could have been a coincidence. It could have been someone waiting for a ride or taking a walk. But deep down, I knew better. I typed frantically, my fingers barely able to hit the right keys. "Who are you?" I sent the message, my body tense with fear. The reply came almost immediately, as if they had been waiting. "Come outside." I nearly dropped the phone. My breathing was shallow, and my legs felt weak. Every rational thought told me not to do it, to stay inside, lock my doors, and call the police. But something about the message, the figure outside, held me in place. I checked the locks on my front door, making sure everything was secure. My fingers hovered over the keypad as I considered dialing 911. But what would I say? That someone texted me to come outside. That there was a person standing on the street. It wasn't illegal to be outside at night. Instead, I turned off the lights, hoping to make it seem like I had gone to bed. Maybe if they thought I wasn't paying attention, they'd leave. I sat in the darkness, gripping my phone, waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Slowly, the tension in my chest eased. Maybe it was over. Just as I was about to get up, my phone vibrated one last time. Dread pooled in my stomach as I looked at the screen. "See you soon." My skin prickled with fear, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. I didn't look outside again. I didn't move. I barely slept that night, every sound making my heart race. By morning, I checked the street through the blinds. There was no sign of the figure, no footprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. But the messages on my phone were real. They weren't a dream. I blocked the number, hoping that would be the end of it. Days passed without another message, and I started to believe it had just been a cruel joke. But a week later, I received a new text. It was from a different number, but the message was the same. "Are you alone? Alone?" Story 13. I set the glass of water down on the kitchen counter, the sunlight catching the rim and casting a faint reflection on the surface. It was just a habit, something I did every morning before heading to work. The house was quiet, untouched by anyone but me, and I had no reason to think anything would be different when I returned. I grabbed my keys, took one last glance at the glass, and left for the day. Work was the same as always, a monotonous cycle of emails, meetings, and small talk. By the time I got home, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting my bag down by the entrance. The house smelled the same, felt the same, and nothing seemed out of place. But as I walked into the kitchen, I stopped. The glass was gone. I frowned, staring at the empty spot on the counter where I was sure I had left it. My first thought was that maybe I had put it away without realizing it, though I didn't remember doing so. I checked the sink, nothing. I opened the cabinet where I kept my glasses, but everything was neatly stacked, undisturbed. The glass had simply disappeared. I stood there for a moment, trying to recall every action I had taken that morning. Maybe I had been distracted, moved it somewhere without thinking. I checked the dining table, the living room, even the bathroom, but it wasn't there. A strange unease settled in my chest. I lived alone. No one else had been inside. I shook it off, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I had been mistaken. Maybe I hadn't actually taken the glass out at all. Still, the feeling of something being off clung to me as I went about my evening. The next morning, I placed another glass of water on the counter before leaving for work. I made sure to take a mental snapshot of it this time, noting the way the condensation formed against the smooth surface. When I returned that evening, my heart pounded as I stepped into the kitchen. The glass was gone again. This time I searched more thoroughly, checking every room, every corner of the house. I even looked inside the refrigerator, as ridiculous as it seemed. It was nowhere. The realization that something was happening, something beyond explanation, sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to brush it off, but the following morning I decided to test it again. I filled another glass, placed it in the exact same spot, and even took a picture with my phone before heading out. When I returned that night, my stomach knotted as I approached the counter. The glass was gone. I checked my phone, staring at the photo I had taken that morning. There it was, right where I had left it. Undeniable proof that I hadn't imagined it. Something was taking the glass, or someone. I didn't sleep well that night, every creak of the house setting me on edge. I locked my bedroom door, though I knew that wouldn't stop whatever was happening. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be some rational reason, but deep down I didn't believe that anymore. The next morning I placed another glass on the counter, but this time I stayed home. I sat in the living room, my ears straining for any sound. Hours passed, the house remaining still and silent. I got up a few times to check the kitchen, and each time, the glass was still there. It wasn't until I stepped away for just a moment only to use the bathroom that it vanished. I returned to the kitchen, and the glass was gone. My breath hitched as I spun around, searching the empty house for an explanation. It was impossible. I had been here. I had been watching. I checked every room again, this time with a growing sense of dread. When I entered my bedroom, I froze. Sitting neatly on my nightstand was the missing glass, still half full of water. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the air in the room feeling heavier, colder. I didn't remember bringing it here. I hadn't even gone into my bedroom all day. Something else had moved it. I left the house that night, checking into a hotel just to get away. I needed space, time to think. I considered calling someone, telling a friend, but what would I even say? That my drinking glasses were teleporting around my house. It sounded insane. The next morning I returned, hesitant as I stepped inside. The house was quiet, just as I had left it. But when I walked into the kitchen, a chill ran through me. Sitting on the counter, right where I had originally placed it, was the same glass of water. It was as if nothing had happened. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't touch it. I didn't move it. I simply grabbed my keys and left again, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it, but the pattern continued. Anytime I left a glass in the kitchen, it would disappear and reappear somewhere else, sometimes in my bedroom, sometimes in the bathroom, once even in the hallway closet. Always full, always untouched. I set up my phone one evening, propping it up to record while I was out. When I returned, I played back the footage, my hands shaking as I fast-forwarded through the hours. At first, nothing happened. The kitchen remained still, undisturbed. Then, just as the sun began to set, the screen flickered. A shadow passed across the frame, too quick, too vague to make out. And then, just like that, the glass was gone. No movement, no sign of how it had vanished. It was there 1 second and gone the next. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. This wasn't just my imagination. Something was in my house. Something unseen, something I couldn't explain. That night, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay there any longer. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated, looking back toward the kitchen one last time. The glass was back on the counter, right where I had left it that morning. This time there was a single fingerprint on the rim. It wasn't mine. Story 14. The bathroom was quiet, the air still and heavy with steam from my shower. I wiped the fogged mirror with my hand, watching as my reflection slowly came into focus. My eyes were tired, my face pale under the harsh white light. But as I leaned forward to examine the dark circles under my eyes, I saw something else in the mirror. Behind me, just past my shoulder, was a figure standing perfectly still. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around, expecting to see someone in my bathroom. The space behind me was empty. The shower curtain remained undisturbed, the door still shut. I turned back to the mirror, my heart pounding. The figure was still there. It was taller than me, its form shadowed and indistinct, as if it weren't fully solid. I felt cold, despite the lingering heat from my shower. My fingers trembled as I reached back, waving my hand behind me, but the figure didn't react. It only stood there, unmoving, watching. I backed away, my mind racing for an explanation. I had to be imagining things, maybe a trick of the light or leftover steam distorting the reflection. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became that it was real. It wasn't fading, wasn't disappearing like a shadow might. It was staying, waiting. I turned off the bathroom light and flicked it back on, hoping it would change what I saw. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my reflection. I let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish for letting my imagination get the better of me. But as I turned to leave, I hesitated. The air felt wrong, heavier somehow, like something was pressing in around me. I left the bathroom, trying to shake the unease clinging to me. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator. I walked into the living room, sinking onto the couch, rubbing my hands over my face. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress from work creeping into my thoughts. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had been there. That night I struggled to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the figure standing behind me. My body refused to fully relax, my senses hyper-aware of every sound, every shift of darkness in the room. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with mirrors, each one reflecting something that shouldn't be there. The next morning, I avoided the bathroom mirror entirely. I brushed my teeth while staring at the sink, refusing to meet my own reflection. It felt childish, but I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at my gut. Before leaving for work, I stole one last glance at the mirror, just to reassure myself that it was normal. The figure was back. This time it was closer. It stood directly behind me, its face still obscured by shadows, its form pressing against the edges of the reflection. A strangled gasp escaped my throat as I turned around, but once again, the bathroom was empty. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe, trying to think rationally. I lifted my phone and took a picture of the mirror, my hands shaking. When I looked at the photo, my reflection stared back at me alone. No figure, no shadow, nothing but my own face. My stomach churned, my skin crawling with unease. For the next few days, I avoided the mirror as much as possible. I left the bathroom light off, relying on the dim glow from the hallway. I dressed in front of my closet mirror instead, though I never looked too closely. Every time I passed by a reflective surface, I felt the urge to check, but I resisted. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up to the sound of something shifting in my bathroom. It was faint, barely more than a whisper of movement, but it sent ice down my spine. I lay frozen in bed, listening. My pulse thudded in my ears, my breath shallow. Then I heard it again, a quiet creak, like a weight shifting on the bathroom tiles. I forced myself up, my body tense with fear. The apartment was dark, shadows stretching across the floor as I moved toward the bathroom door. My fingers hovered over the light switch before flipping it on. The room flooded with light, revealing nothing out of place. The mirror, however, was different. The surface was smeared, as if someone had pressed their hands against it. Faint streaks trailed down, almost like fingerprints dragged down the glass. My stomach twisted as I took a hesitant step closer. The room smelled damp, the air thick with something stale and cloying. I reached out and touched the mirror, half expecting it to be warm. It was ice cold. A soft breath brushed against my neck. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The room was empty, but I could feel it now, something lingering just beyond my vision. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I grabbed the hand towel and wiped the mirror clean. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, alone. I didn't sleep that night. I left every light on, refusing to close my eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. My mind raced through possible explanations: stress, lack of sleep, paranoia, but none of them felt right. The next morning I called a friend, asking if I could stay with them for a few days. Being away from my apartment helped, but I still felt uneasy. My dreams were filled with mirrors, distorted reflections that moved when I didn't. I woke up feeling drained, as if something had followed me even in my sleep. After 3 days, I convinced myself that I had imagined it all, that it was just a bad mix of exhaustion and stress. When I returned home, the apartment was just as I had left it. Everything was quiet, still. I let out a breath, laughing a little at how ridiculous I had been. I told myself I was fine. That night, I walked into the bathroom with confidence, determined to prove that nothing was wrong. I flipped on the light and stared at my reflection. The figure was there. This time it wasn't standing behind me. It was in my place. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The reflection wasn't mine. It had my face, my features, but its expression was different. Its lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. My own hands trembled at my sides, but in the mirror they remained perfectly still. I stepped back, and the reflection didn't move. Cold terror flooded my veins as I watched myself, or what looked like me, standing motionless on the other side of the glass. My chest rose and fell in panic breaths, but the reflection only smiled wider, its eyes dark and knowing. I bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hand shook as I fumbled with my phone, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't process. My reflection wasn't mine anymore. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard a quiet, muffled laugh. Story 15. The knock at the door was sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of my evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, and something about the sound put me on edge. I hesitated before standing, debating whether I should even answer. A glance through the peephole showed a man I didn't recognize, standing stiffly with his hands at his sides. He looked normal enough, dark jacket, neatly combed hair, but there was something unsettling about the way he stared straight ahead, unblinking. I cracked the door open just enough to speak through. Before I could ask what he wanted, he spoke first. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said, his voice eerily calm. A chill ran down my spine. There was no introduction, no explanation, just that strange statement. His expression didn't change, his eyes locked onto mine like he was expecting me to let him in. "I think you have the wrong house," I said, already closing the door. His hand twitched at his side like he wanted to stop me, but he didn't. The latch clicked into place, and I stepped back, heart pounding. Something about the encounter felt off, like I had just turned away from something I wasn't meant to ignore. Through the peephole, I saw him still standing there, unmoving. A heavy sense of unease settled in my chest. Minutes passed, and he didn't leave. He just stood there, as if waiting for me to change my mind. I forced myself to walk away, to go back to my seat, but I couldn't focus on anything else. The presence of him outside my door lingered, pressing against my thoughts. After what felt like forever, I returned to the peephole. The porch was empty. A breath of relief left my lips, but it didn't last long. When I checked the window facing the street, I saw him standing on the sidewalk facing my house. The way he stood rigid and unwavering sent a new wave of fear through me. He wasn't looking at anything else, just my front door. I closed the blinds quickly, trying to push down the rising panic. He wasn't trying to break in, wasn't shouting or threatening, but his presence alone felt like a violation. I sat on the couch, phone gripped in my hand, debating whether to call the police. What would I even say? A man knocked on my door, said something cryptic, and then just stood there. It didn't sound like much, but deep down I knew it wasn't nothing. An hour passed, then two. I checked the window again, dreading what I might see. He was gone. Relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake the unease. I double-checked the locks, turned on every light in the house, and sat in tense silence, waiting for something else to happen. That night, sleep was impossible. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak of the house felt like a warning. I kept expecting another knock, another voice outside my door. When morning finally came, I felt exhausted but relieved that nothing else had happened. I tried to convince myself it was over, just a strange encounter that didn't mean anything. But as I left for work, I noticed something on my doorstep. A single piece of paper, folded neatly in half. My stomach tightened as I picked it up, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The message was simple. "You should have let me in." My breath caught in my throat. There was no signature, no explanation, just those 5 words in a neat, deliberate script. I scanned the street, my skin crawling, but there was no one in sight. At work, I couldn't focus. The note sat in my bag, burning in the back of my mind. I kept thinking about his voice, his unblinking stare, the way he had just stood there for hours. Whoever he was, he had come back, and he wanted me to know it. I considered calling the police then, but what could they do? He hadn't technically done anything illegal. He knocked, he spoke, he left a note. That was it. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. I knew he wasn't done. That night, I kept all the lights on and checked every lock twice. Hours passed in silence, but I couldn't relax. My pulse stayed high, my nerves frayed. I sat on the couch, watching the door, waiting for something to happen. Then, just past midnight, the knock came again. It was slow and deliberate, just like before. My breath caught in my throat, and every muscle in my body tensed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking continued, steady and patient, as if he knew I was listening. I crept toward the peephole, heart hammering in my chest. He was there again, standing just as he had the night before. His face was eerily blank, his hands still at his sides. "Let me in," he said, his voice muffled through the door. Panic gripped me. I backed away, my fingers hovering over my phone. But before I could dial, the knocking stopped. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I waited, straining to hear any movement. Nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I checked the peephole again. The porch was empty, but I didn't feel safe. I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. The air in my house felt different, heavier, like his presence had seeped through the walls. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat in the dark, every shadow feeling like him, every sound making me jump. The next morning, another note waited on my doorstep. This one was shorter. "Next time you won't have a choice." My hands shook as I crumpled the paper. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Story 16. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter like I always did when I got home. A faint jingle echoed through the quiet house as I set down my bag and headed to the fridge for a drink. My day had been long and all I wanted was to relax. I grabbed a bottle of water and turned to go to the living room. As I passed by the counter, I instinctively reached for my keys, but my hand met nothing but cool granite. My brow furrowed as I glanced around, certain I had left them right there. The counter was bare except for a few unopened letters and my phone. My eyes darted to the floor, thinking they might have fallen, but the tiles were empty. A strange unease crept up my spine as I scanned the room. My gaze landed on the couch across the room, and my breath caught in my throat. There, sitting neatly on the cushion, were my keys. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. I hadn't been near the couch since coming home. I walked over slowly, my heartbeat quickening with every step. The keys were exactly as I had left them, facing upward, my car fob resting on top. My fingers hovered over them for a moment before I picked them up, feeling the familiar cool metal press into my palm. A shiver ran through me as I turned back toward the kitchen. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had absent-mindedly placed them there without realizing it. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I knew I hadn't touched that couch. I shook my head and let out a slow breath, forcing the tension from my shoulders. It was just one of those weird things, I told myself. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but the feeling of unease never left. As I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the thought that something had been off. I drifted into a restless sleep, my dreams filled with shifting objects and unseen hands. The next morning, I tried to push the incident from my mind. I grabbed my keys, double-checking that they were in my hand, and left for work. By the time I returned home that evening, I had convinced myself that it was all in my head. But as I stepped into the house, something felt different. My skin prickled as I glanced around. Everything looked normal, but the air felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I placed my keys on the counter again, deliberately watching as I set them down. I even pressed them against the surface to be sure they wouldn't move. Then, forcing myself to relax, I walked into my bedroom to change. When I came back 10 minutes later, my stomach dropped. The keys were gone. My hands clenched at my sides as my eyes darted around the room. I turned toward the living room, my pulse hammering against my ribs. There, sitting neatly on the armrest of the couch, were my keys. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I stood frozen in place, my mind scrambling for an explanation. The house was locked. No one else had been inside, and yet somehow the keys had moved again. I swallowed hard and stepped forward, my fingers tightening into fists. I grabbed the keys and held them tightly, as if they might vanish from my grasp. My chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. This wasn't just forgetfulness. Something was happening. Something I couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. I kept my keys beside me on the nightstand, unwilling to leave them unattended. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. A metallic clatter jolted me awake. My breath hitched as I shot up in bed. My eyes darted to the nightstand. The keys were gone. My heart pounded as I threw off the covers and scanned the room. A soft, unnatural silence filled the air. I took a shaky step forward, my hands trembling. My pulse roared in my ears as I moved toward the door. The hallway was dark, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I forced myself forward, my bare feet padding softly against the floor. My breath came in shallow gasps as I reached the living room. My stomach twisted into knots. The keys sat in the center of the coffee table, perfectly placed. A chill settled deep into my bones. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't just a trick of memory. Something was moving them, something unseen. My skin prickled as I turned back toward my bedroom. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat upright in bed, every light in my room on, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. When morning finally came, I made a decision. I needed to leave. I packed a bag, taking only what I needed. I would stay at a hotel for a few nights, clear my head, figure out what to do. As I reached for my keys to leave, a wave of nausea rolled over me. They were gone again. My body went rigid, my breath catching in my throat. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The air felt charged, heavy with something unseen. A deep, suffocating silence filled the space around me. I forced my feet to move, searching every inch of the house. I checked the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. Nothing. The keys had vanished. My hands trembled as I braced myself against the counter, my chest rising and falling in panicked breaths. And then I saw them. They were on the couch again. But this time they weren't alone. Sitting next to them was something else. A single piece of paper. My hands shook as I stepped closer. In the center of the page, written in sharp, precise handwriting, were 3 words. You can't leave. The air around me seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. My vision blurred as my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I grabbed the keys and the note, my fingers gripping them so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't wait, I didn't think. I ran. I flung open the door and bolted outside, the morning air hitting me like a slap. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the engine roaring to life beneath my shaking hands. As I sped away, my mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. I was never going back. Story 17. I checked my watch and saw it was 3 p.m. The afternoon sunlight filtered through my window, casting long shadows across my bedroom floor. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, so I decided to take a short nap before heading out for the evening. I closed my eyes and let the quiet lull me into sleep. The moment I drifted off, a strange sensation washed over me, as if I were sinking into something deeper than rest. There were no dreams, no flashes of thought, just an endless void that stretched on and on. When I opened my eyes, the room was darker than before. The sunlight had vanished, replaced by the dim hues of early evening. I sat up quickly, blinking in confusion, and turned to check the time on my watch. The numbers read 6 p.m., and my heart pounded in my chest. It felt like only minutes had passed, yet 3 whole hours had slipped away. My body didn't feel refreshed as it should have after a nap. It felt drained, as if I had been somewhere else entirely. I stood up, feeling slightly unsteady as I walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, the golden glow of sunset painting the houses in an eerie light. Something about the silence felt unnatural, as if the world had shifted in some imperceptible way while I was unconscious. Trying to shake off the unease, I grabbed my phone to check for any missed calls or messages. There was nothing, not even a notification from any of my usual apps. The absence of activity only added to the gnawing feeling that something was off. I made my way to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. As I looked into the mirror, a chill ran down my spine. My reflection stared back, unchanged, yet there was a strange hollowness in my own eyes. It was as if I had just returned from a place my mind couldn't fully comprehend. A sudden noise from the living room made me whip my head around. It was a soft creak, like the weight of someone shifting on the old wooden floorboards. My breath caught as I stepped cautiously out of the bathroom, my senses on high alert. I scanned the room, but everything was exactly as I had left it. The television was off, my keys were still on the coffee table, and the curtains remained drawn. But the air felt different, like someone had been here, like something had moved just beyond my sight. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was just groggy from the strange nap. I walked over to the front door and checked the locks. They were still in place, and there was no sign of forced entry. Yet the feeling of unease clung to me, refusing to let go. Sitting on the couch, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think logically. Maybe I had just been more exhausted than I realized. Maybe my body needed the extra sleep, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the answer. As the minutes passed, I noticed another oddity. The clock on the wall still reads 6 p.m. I checked my phone again, but the time hadn't changed. My watch, my phone, and the clock were all frozen at the exact same moment. A chill settled over me as I picked up my phone and tried to call anyone. The call wouldn't go through, and when I tried to access the internet, nothing loaded. It was as if time itself had stopped, trapping me in this single moment. I stood abruptly, my pulse racing. I walked over to the window and looked outside again. The world beyond seemed eerily still, the usual movement of trees and distant cars absent. It was like a photograph, frozen in time. My mind struggled to make sense of it all. Had I really lost time, or had I stepped into something else entirely? The thoughts sent a wave of nausea through me, and I gripped the edge of the windowsill to steady myself. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything shifted. My phone vibrated in my hand, the clock on the wall ticked forward, and the world outside resumed its usual motion. I gasped as if I had been holding my breath without realizing it. The time on my watch now reads 6:01 p.m. My phone screen filled with notifications, messages that had seemingly been waiting in limbo. The eerie stillness vanished, but the unease remained, settling deep in my bones. I sat back down, staring at my hands as they trembled slightly. Whatever had happened in those lost hours was beyond my understanding. The normalcy of the world around me now felt fragile, like a thin veil over something far more unsettling. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been somewhere else, somewhere just beyond the reach of time. Sleep did not come easily, and when it did, I feared I might wake up to find even more time had slipped away. Story 18. The first knock was so soft that I almost thought I imagined it. I paused, listening, my hands still soapy from washing dishes. The house was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward the front door, peering through the peephole. No one was there. The porch light cast a dim glow over the empty steps, and the street beyond was still. I frowned, unlocking the door and cracking it open slightly. A cool breeze drifted in, but the neighborhood was quiet. I stepped out onto the porch, looking left and right. The houses were dark, most of my neighbors already in bed. There was no sign of movement, no retreating footsteps. I rubbed my arms, a strange chill settling over me. With one last glance around, I went back inside and locked the door. As soon as I turned away, another knock sounded, sharper this time. My stomach tightened as I spun back around. I hesitated before reaching for the doorknob again. This time I opened the door fully, stepping onto the porch. Nothing. The street was empty, the night still. My porch light flickered briefly, casting long shadows across the pavement. I swallowed, my pulse quickening as I scanned the area again. No rustling bushes, no shifting shadows, just silence. A third knock came, this time behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding. The door was still wide open, and no one was there. The sound had come from inside the house. My throat went dry as I stepped back over the threshold, glancing down the hallway. The house felt different, heavier, as if something unseen had shifted. I shut the door quickly, locking it with trembling fingers. My breath came faster as I backed away, straining to listen. The air was thick with something unexplainable, something just beyond my understanding. I forced myself to move, checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Each room was exactly as I had left it, yet the feeling of being watched clung to me. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unease. Maybe I was overtired, my mind playing tricks on me. I sat on the couch, turning on the television to drown out the silence. The glow from the screen did little to settle my nerves. My eyes flicked to the hallway leading to the front door, half expecting to see movement in the dim light. I forced myself to focus on the screen, willing the tension to fade. Then, the fourth knock came slow, deliberate. I flinched, my breath catching in my throat. My skin prickled as I turned my head, staring toward the door. The knock had been louder this time, as if whoever or whatever it was wanted to be heard. I stood up, every instinct screaming at me not to answer. My legs felt heavy as I stepped toward the door, my hand hovering over the knob. My pulse thundered in my ears as I braced myself and yanked it open. The porch was empty. The street remained unchanged, the night pressing in like a thick blanket. My fingers trembled against the doorframe as I forced myself to take another step forward. The silence was deafening. A cold gust of air rushed past me, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned sharply, looking behind me, half expecting someone to be standing in the doorway. But there was nothing. Only my living room, quiet and still. I swallowed hard and shut the door, locking it once more. I leaned against the wood, my forehead resting against its cool surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just let something in. The thought sent another wave of fear through me, but I refused to acknowledge it. I was being irrational. There had to be a logical explanation. Still, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the couch. Instead, I moved to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. The weight of exhaustion settled over me, but my body remained tense. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, listening. The house was silent again. No knocks, no movement. I exhaled shakily, letting my eyes close. My mind fought against the unease, convincing itself that the worst had passed. Somewhere in the darkness, a soft creak echoed from the hallway. My body went rigid, my breath catching in my throat. My bedroom door was locked, I had made sure of it. Yet the sound had been unmistakable, like slow, careful footsteps against the wooden floor. I gripped the sheets, barely breathing as I listened. Another creak, closer this time. The air in the room seemed to tighten around me, pressing against my skin. I stared at the door, heart pounding, waiting for the next sound. A shadow passed beneath the door, a shifting darkness that didn't belong. My stomach lurched, a cold sweat breaking out along my back. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to move, not to make a sound. The shadow lingered for what felt like hours before it slowly faded. The air felt lighter again, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. I didn't dare move, barely allowing myself to breathe. The silence stretched on, deep and suffocating. At some point, exhaustion overtook fear, pulling me into a restless sleep. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the window, the familiar warmth of morning chasing away the night's terror. I sat up slowly, glancing around. Everything appeared normal. I forced myself out of bed, moving hesitantly toward the hallway. The floor creaked beneath my feet, but the house was still. I swallowed, stepping toward the front door, half expecting to see something waiting for me. The locks were still in place, the chain undisturbed. I exhaled, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the lingering unease. Maybe it really had been my imagination, a product of exhaustion and nerves. But as I turned away, my eyes caught something just outside the door. A single footprint, barely visible in the morning light, pressed into the welcome mat. The sight sent a chill down my spine. Someone or something had been there last night, and I had answered the door. Story 19. The first time I heard it, I thought it was coming from outside. A faint, distant melody drifted through the house, just soft enough to be almost unnoticeable. I paused what I was doing, tilting my head toward the sound, but as soon as I focused, it seemed to fade away. Shaking it off, I assumed it was a neighbor playing music or the wind carrying a tune from somewhere down the street. Later that evening, I heard it again, this time while I was brushing my teeth. A slow, familiar tune hummed through the air, soft and distant, like an old record playing in another room. I turned off the faucet, listening intently, but again the sound disappeared before I could pinpoint its source. It left an eerie feeling lingering in my chest, but I told myself it was nothing. The next night, the melody returned, clearer than before. I was in bed, scrolling mindlessly on my phone when the faint notes drifted through the room. It wasn't coming from outside this time, I was sure of that. It felt closer, as though it was seeping through the walls, filling the space around me. I sat up, holding my breath, trying to recognize the song. There was something unsettlingly familiar about it, but I couldn't place it. I swung my legs over the bed, the wooden floor cool against my feet, and stepped out into the hallway. The tune faded as I moved, slipping just out of reach like a dream upon waking. Frustrated, I walked through the house, checking every room. The kitchen was silent, the living room still, the guest room untouched. There was no music source, no radio, no television, no forgotten alarm clock playing on low volume. I even checked my phone, wondering if a hidden app was running in the background, but there was nothing. The next morning, I tried to push the experience from my mind, chalking it up to exhaustion. But as I went about my day, the melody returned, floating through the air just at the edge of my hearing. It was infuriating, always there, but never loud enough to fully grasp. I found myself humming it without realizing, my mind latching onto the tune even though I couldn't name it. By the fourth night, I was losing sleep over it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to start. When it did, I threw off the blankets and flicked on the light, determined to find the source. I walked the halls, pressing my ear against the walls, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It felt like it was shifting, moving from room to room just ahead of me. I checked the attic, thinking maybe an old radio had been left behind by a previous owner. But the dusty space was empty aside from a few boxes. I even checked the vents, wondering if the sound was carrying from another apartment, but that didn't explain why it stopped when I moved. The more I searched, the more the unease settled in my bones. I tried recording it, but every time I played back the audio, there was nothing. The music didn't exist beyond my own ears, and that realization sent a chill through me. I wasn't just hearing a song, I was being haunted by it. The next day, I decided to focus on the melody itself, trying to remember where I had heard it before. It was slow, almost melancholy, with a tune that made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. It reminded me of something, but the memory was just out of reach, like a word on the tip of my tongue. That night, I let the song play instead of chasing it. I stayed in bed, eyes closed, listening as it wove through the walls. A memory flickered at the edges of my mind, faint but there. A music box. Small hands turning the key. Soft notes drifting through the air. My grandmother's house. A wooden music box on her nightstand, its delicate tune playing as she brushed my hair. The song was hers, a melody I hadn't heard since childhood. My breath caught in my throat. My grandmother had died years ago, and the music box had been lost when we cleared out her house. I sat up, my heart racing as the song continued. Was it a memory surfacing or something more? I whispered her name, my voice barely above a breath, and the music stopped instantly. The silence was thick, heavy, as if the house itself was listening. The next morning, I dug through old boxes, searching for anything that might explain the connection. I found an old photograph of my grandmother sitting in her favorite chair, the music box resting on the table beside her. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. The tune wasn't random, it was a part of my past, something I had long forgotten. That night, when the music started again, I didn't move. I stayed still, letting the notes wrap around me, feeling their weight. I whispered, "Grandma." And for the first time, the song didn't stop. Instead, it grew clearer, stronger, as if acknowledging my call. Tears burned my eyes as I listened. It wasn't frightening anymore, it was comforting. A lingering presence that had always been there, waiting to be heard. I closed my eyes, letting the melody carry me back to a time when I had sat on my grandmother's lap, safe and warm, the music box playing between us. The song still comes sometimes, drifting through the walls like a forgotten lullaby. I don't chase it anymore. I let it play, a quiet reminder that some things never truly fade. Story 20. The house at the end of the street had been abandoned for years. No one knew why its owners had left so suddenly, but rumors spread about strange noises and shadowy figures in the windows. It stood there, rotting and forgotten, until one evening I saw a light flicker inside. I told myself it was just my imagination, but curiosity gnawed at me. I decided to take a closer look, walking cautiously up the cracked stone pathway. The front door, which had always been shut, was now slightly ajar, creaking as the wind pushed against it. Stepping inside, I was met with the scent of dust and decay. The wooden floor groaned beneath my feet as I moved through the entryway. The living room was in disarray, old furniture covered in sheets, a thick layer of dust coating every surface. I turned toward the staircase, where I swore I heard a faint whisper. My pulse quickened as I strained to listen, but the house fell silent again. Still, the sensation of being watched crawled over me, making my skin prickle. As I climbed the stairs, each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder, thick with something I couldn't explain. At the top of the staircase, a long hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors. One door, at the very end, stood slightly open, a sliver of darkness waiting beyond it. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer. The whispering returned, clearer this time, like hushed voices just beyond the threshold. Pushing the door open, I was met with an empty room. Its only furnishings an old, dust-covered chair facing a broken window. The whispering stopped the moment I entered, leaving only the sound of my own shallow breaths. I turned to leave, but my body froze as I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. Something was wrong. My reflection stood still, its head tilted slightly, watching me with dark, empty eyes. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. My reflection didn't move with me, it stayed where it was, staring with an eerie, knowing grin. The room seemed to close in around me, shadows stretching from the corners like grasping hands. A deep, guttural laugh echoed from the mirror, and I bolted from the room, slamming the door shut behind me. The house shuddered as if it were breathing, the walls groaning in protest. I ran down the stairs, but the front door was no longer there, just an expanse of rotting wood, trapping me inside. Panic clawed at my throat as the whispering returned, louder now, surrounding me from every direction. Shadows coiled around my feet, slithering closer as I pounded against the wall where the door had been. A cold breath brushed against my ear, and a voice whispered my name. I turned, but there was nothing there, only the vast darkness swallowing the house. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around my limbs, dragging me down into the floor. I fought against them, my screams swallowed by the void, my vision fading to black. When I opened my eyes, I was back outside, standing at the foot of the cracked stone pathway. The house loomed before me, silent and unchanged, its door shut tight as if I had never entered. My breath came in short gasps, my hands trembling as I backed away. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye in the second-floor window. A figure stood there, watching me with empty, hollow eyes. It was me. My reflection smiled. Story 21. I scrolled through my phone absent-mindedly, clearing out old pictures when I saw one that made my breath catch. It was a photo of me at a party, standing in the middle of a crowded room, drink in hand. The problem was, I had never been to that party before. The people around me were complete strangers, and the place was unfamiliar. My first thought was that it had been sent to me by mistake, though the timestamp showed it had been taken last night. I had spent the entire evening at home watching movies, never leaving my apartment. A chill crept down my spine as I examined the image closer, trying to find anything that made sense. The lighting, the details, even my outfit, everything was realistic. I checked my call log and messages to see if I had gone out and forgotten somehow, but there was nothing unusual. No text from friends, no rideshare receipts, no proof that I had left my place. Yet there I was in the photo, smiling like I was having the time of my life. My fingers trembled as I zoomed in on the background. The people in the image were engaged in conversation, laughing and drinking. None of them looked familiar, and their faces gave me an odd feeling, like something was off. They all seemed normal at first glance, but as I studied them, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every single one of them was looking slightly to the side, as if staring at something just out of frame. I checked my social media to see if anyone had tagged me in the picture, but my account showed no activity. My stomach twisted with unease as I searched for any clue about where the party had taken place. The room had dim lighting with string lights and a large window, but nothing distinctive enough to pinpoint a location. I flipped back to my gallery, staring at my own face in the picture, trying to make sense of it. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, and for a split second, I had the strangest sensation of déjà vu. It was as if my body remembered something my mind did not. My heart pounded as I considered the impossible. Had I actually been there? Had I blacked out the entire night and somehow lost all memory of it? The thought made my stomach churn. I decided to check my apartment for any signs that I had left. My shoes were by the door, untouched. My jacket was still on the chair where I had tossed it the night before. There was no indication that I had gone anywhere, no strange smells, no misplaced items. Everything pointed to me staying home, yet the photo existed. I went back to my phone and looked at the metadata of the picture, hoping to find out where it had been taken. The location data was missing, as if it had never been recorded. That only made me more anxious. I ran a reverse image search, but there were no matches. It was as if the party had never happened except it had, and I had been there. I considered calling a friend, but what would I even say? That I found a picture of myself at a place I had never been. It sounded ridiculous. My pulse pounded in my ears as I kept staring at the photo, willing it to make sense. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. In the reflection of a glass cabinet behind me, there was a partial view of another figure. They were standing just outside the frame, their face blurred as if they had moved at the last second. A sickening sense of dread settled in my gut. I could feel my throat tighten, my breathing shallow and rapid. I enlarged the reflection, trying to make out any details. The figure was tall and had a shape that seemed wrong, like their proportions were slightly off. Their head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and their posture made my skin crawl. I had no memory of ever seeing this person, but something about them felt disturbingly familiar. I suddenly remembered the feeling I had last night before going to bed. A strange unease, a sensation that someone had been watching me through my window. I had chalked it up to paranoia, but now I wasn't so sure. My skin prickled as I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see a shadowy figure standing outside. I needed to do something, anything to prove that this was just a mistake. I decided to check my security camera footage. My apartment complex had cameras in the hallways, and I had a small one outside my door. My hands shook as I accessed the footage and rewound to the night before. The timestamp showed that I had never left my apartment. Hours of footage showed nothing but an empty hallway. I exhaled sharply, relief flooding through me until I fast-forwarded to the early morning hours. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the camera outside my door glitched for a full minute. When it resumed, the door to my apartment was slightly ajar. I froze, my stomach dropping like a stone. I had locked that door before bed. There was no way I had left it open. My hands felt clammy as I checked the inside footage, hoping for an answer. At 3:18 a.m., the camera in my living room flickered back on, revealing something even worse. For a brief moment, there was a figure standing in the center of my apartment. the same blurred shape from the reflection in the photo. My blood turned ice cold as I paused the video, staring at the distorted image. The figure had no clear face, just a vague outline, as if it wasn't fully there. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't just a mistake. Someone or something had been in my home. The picture wasn't just strange, it was a warning. I needed to leave, now. My gut screamed at me to get out before whatever had been in my apartment decided to return. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the door, but as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed in my pocket. My breath hitched as I looked down at the screen. It was a message notification, but there was no sender. Just a single attachment, a new photo. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Slowly I tapped the message and opened the image. My stomach twisted into knots as I saw what it was. It was another picture of me. But this time I was asleep in my bed, taken from inside my room. The timestamp read 3:19 a.m. Story 22. The mirror slipped from my hands before I could catch it. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crash, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Shards of glass scattered around my feet, some large enough to still reflect the dim light of the room. I sighed, annoyed at myself, and crouched down to start picking up the pieces. As I reached for the first shard, something caught my eye. In the fractured reflection, I saw a face staring back at me, one that wasn't mine. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, my fingers hovering just above the glass. The face was pale, the features sharp and hollow, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. I snapped my head up, expecting to see someone standing in the room with me. But there was no one there. The living room was empty, just as it had been before I dropped the mirror. A cold shiver ran down my spine, my skin prickling with unease. Slowly, I looked back down at the shards. The face was gone, replaced by the ordinary reflection of my hands and the ceiling light above. I exhaled shakily, convincing myself that it had been a trick of the light. I had been tired, distracted. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I quickly gathered the larger shards, careful not to cut myself, and dumped them into a trash bag. The smaller pieces took longer, glinting under the light as I swept them into a dustpan. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to keep moving. After disposing of the broken mirror, I wiped my hands on my jeans and glanced around the room once more. Everything looked the same as before, yet the atmosphere felt heavier. The air was colder, the shadows in the corners seeming to stretch just a little too far. I turned off the living room light and headed to my bedroom, eager to put the unsettling moment behind me. But as I reached for the door, a faint sound stopped me. A whisper, soft, distant, almost too quiet to hear. I turned sharply, my heart pounding in my chest. The living room was silent. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. The curtains were still, the furniture untouched. I swallowed hard, forcing a breath through my nose. I was imagining things, letting my nerves get the best of me. Shaking my head, I walked into my bedroom and shut the door behind me. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chest, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face again, staring back at me from the broken glass. It had felt real, too real to be my imagination. Hours passed before exhaustion finally pulled me under. My dreams were restless, filled with dark corridors and mirrors that shattered the moment I looked into them. When I woke up the next morning, I felt drained, my body heavy with fatigue. I went through my morning routine as usual, trying to shake off the lingering unease. The events of the previous night felt distant, like a bad dream that was already beginning to fade. But as I stepped into the living room, my stomach dropped. A single shard of glass lay in the center of the floor. I had cleaned everything up the night before. There was no way I had missed one. Yet there it was, gleaming under the morning light, as if it had been placed there deliberately. I hesitated before picking it up, holding it carefully between my fingers. My reflection stared back at me, fractured and distorted by the uneven edges. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then, the reflection shifted. Behind me in the glass I saw movement. A dark shape, blurred and indistinct, standing just beyond my shoulder. My breath hitched as I spun around, my pulse hammering in my ears. The room was empty. No one was there. A sharp knock on the front door made me jump, the shard slipping from my fingers and landing with a soft clink. I turned toward the door, my heart still racing. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Carter, standing on my porch. I forced a breath and opened the door, trying to steady my nerves. "Morning," I said, my voice rough from sleep. Mrs. Carter gave me a concerned look. "Are you all right, dear? You look pale." I hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." She pursed her lips, glancing past me into the house. "I thought I heard something last night. A crash. I almost came over to check on you." I stiffened slightly. "Yeah," I dropped a mirror. "Sorry if it was loud." She didn't seem convinced. "Well, just be careful, all right? Broken mirrors are bad luck." She gave me a small smile before heading back to her house. I closed the door and turned back to the living room, my gaze landing on the shard I had dropped. This time I didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I grabbed a tissue and wrapped it carefully before tossing it into the trash. For the rest of the day, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. I stayed busy, running errands, cleaning, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I wasn't alone. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it again. A whisper, faint and distant, drifting through the house like a breath of wind. My body tensed, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the bathroom mirror. At first, I saw only myself, tired and worn, eyes dark from lack of sleep. But then, just for a second, the reflection changed. A shadow passed behind me, swift and silent, disappearing before I could fully register what I had seen. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The bathroom was empty. My hands trembled as I turned back to the mirror, but my reflection was normal again. No shadow, no face staring back at me, just my own haunted expression. I backed out of the bathroom, switching off the light and hurrying to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me, pressing my back against it as I tried to steady my breathing. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. The broken mirror hadn't just been bad luck. It had opened something. And now, whatever had been in the reflection, whatever had been watching, was no longer trapped behind the glass. Story 23. I woke up with a dull sting running along my forearm. At first I thought it was just an itch, something small and insignificant, until my fingers brushed over the raised edges of a fresh scratch. It was long and deep, running from my wrist to my elbow, thin but unmistakably deliberate. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to recall how I could have gotten it. The night before had been unremarkable. I had gone to bed at my usual time, locked the doors and shut the windows. There was nothing in my room that could have caused it, no exposed nails, no sharp objects near my bed. I turned my arm over, inspecting the wound more closely. It was raw, the edges slightly red, as if it had just been made hours ago. I got up and went to the bathroom, flipping on the light to examine it in the mirror. The scratch looked worse under the harsh glow, as if something had clawed at me. I ran the sink, dabbing at the wound with a wet cloth, wincing at the sting. The more I stared at it, the more unsettled I became. It wasn't the kind of scrape you got from bumping into something that looked intentional. Trying to shake off the unease, I told myself I must have scratched myself in my sleep. Maybe I had a bad dream, thrashed around, and somehow did this without realizing. It was the only explanation that made sense. I cleaned the wound, wrapped it in a bandage, and tried to push the thought aside as I got ready for the day. But the feeling of being watched stayed with me. At work, I found myself absently rubbing at the bandage, the itch beneath it constant. I kept replaying the night in my head, searching for any moment that could explain it. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, but I couldn't shake the eerie feeling lingering in my bones. That night, I made sure to check every inch of my bed before lying down. I examined the sheets, the pillows, even the edges of the mattress for anything that could have left a mark on me. Finding nothing, I forced myself to sleep, determined to wake up without a new scratch. When morning came, I felt the sting before I even opened my eyes. A dread pooled in my stomach as I sat up, already knowing what I would find. I yanked back the covers and looked at my arm. A new scratch, this one shorter but just as deep, ran along the side of my wrist. My pulse pounded in my ears as I threw the blankets aside, checking my bed for anything sharp. There was nothing. I stood, breathing heavily, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The scratches were too precise, too clean to be an accident. It didn't make sense. My nails were short, too blunt to make a mark that deep. I pressed my palm against the sink, trying to steady myself. Something was wrong. That night, I set up my phone to record while I slept. I propped it up on my nightstand, angling the camera toward my bed, making sure it would catch anything that happened. I hesitated before turning off the lights, a lingering fear creeping up my spine. Whatever was happening, I was going to find out. I barely slept, my body tense, my ears straining for any sound. At some point, exhaustion won over, and I drifted into uneasy dreams. When I woke up, my arm was burning. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and ripped the covers away. Another scratch. This one ran across my forearm in the opposite direction of the others, deeper than before. My skin crawled as I turned toward my phone, my hands shaking as I grabbed it. The recording was still going. I stopped the video and rewound, scanning through the footage as my breath came in quick, shallow gasps. At first, it was just me shifting slightly in my sleep, the blankets rising and falling with my breathing. The room was still, silent. Then, at around 3 a.m, the screen flickered. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, I saw it. A shadow moved in the darkness. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. A faint, shifting blur appeared at the edge of the frame, just near my bed. It was vague, undefined, but unmistakably there. My breath hitched as I watched it linger, hovering near my arm. Then, without warning, my body twitched. The scratch appeared before my eyes. I dropped the phone, my whole body trembling. I had felt nothing. I had heard nothing. But something had been there. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my keys and left, not bothering to pack, not even bothering to shut off the lights. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel too tightly, my thoughts racing. I checked into a motel, locking the door behind me, heart still thudding in my chest. I didn't sleep. The next morning I debated what to do. Calling the police seemed pointless. What would I even say? That something invisible was scratching me in my sleep. No one would believe me. I considered calling a friend, but how could I explain what I had seen? After hours of restless pacing, I decided to go back, if only to grab some things. The house was exactly as I had left it, lights on, door locked, nothing out of place. But when I stepped inside, a cold dread filled me. My phone was still on the bed, the screen black. I hesitated before picking it up. The battery had drained, but before it shut off, it had recorded one last thing. I plugged it in and waited for it to turn back on, my stomach twisting. When the screen lit up, the video from the night before was still open. I pressed play, forcing myself to watch. The shadow moved again, faint but deliberate, hovering just over me. Then, as my body shifted, something appeared on the screen. A hand. It was barely visible, only a trace of movement, but it was there, hovering just above my arm, fingers poised like claws. And then, in a swift, fluid motion, it dragged down. The scratch formed in real time. The video ended. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. There was something in my house, something unseen, something that could touch me, mark me. I left that day and never went back. Days turned into weeks and the scratches stopped. I tried to forget, tried to push it all away, but some nights, I woke up feeling phantom pain along my arm. I never watched the footage again, but the image of that hand reaching out of the dark would never leave my mind. Story 24. The message appeared on my screen just as I was about to put my phone down for the night. My fingers hovered over the glowing text, my pulse quickening as I read the words again. I'm outside your house right now. A chill crept down my spine as I turned my head toward the window, my bedroom bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp outside. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The front yard was empty, the street silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves. No cars sat idling at the curb, no shadows lurked beneath the trees. My breath came out in a slow, shaky exhale as I checked the time, 12:47 a.m. I typed back a quick response. Who is this? The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, showing that whoever it was had been waiting. My hands clenched the phone tighter as the reply came. You don't remember me. My stomach twisted. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my thoughts logical. It had to be a prank, some random number messing with me for a reaction. My thumb hovered over the block button, but curiosity won out. You have the wrong number, I replied. A pause, then another message. No, I don't. I sat up in bed, my back pressing against the headboard. The air in my room felt colder now, as if something unseen had crept inside. I turned my phone to silent and placed its screen down on my nightstand. If it was a joke, I wasn't going to feed into it. Minutes passed. My phone vibrated again. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the screen. A picture had been sent. My heart stuttered as I hesitated, then tapped it open. It was my house. A photo taken from just outside, angled toward my living room window. I scrambled out of bed, my breathing uneven as I rushed to the window again. My eyes darted over the yard, searching for movement, for any sign of someone lurking in the dark. Nothing. The photo had to be old, maybe pulled from online or taken earlier in the day. My phone buzzed again. I see you. My blood ran cold. My fingers tightened around my phone as I slowly turned, scanning my dimly lit bedroom. The door was still closed. The only movement was the faint sway of my curtains from the ceiling fan. I texted back quickly. "I'm calling the police." This time the response came faster than before. "They won't find me." My hands felt numb as I unlocked my phone and dialed. My heart pounded as the line rang once, twice. Then a click. 911, what's your emergency? I swallowed down my fear and kept my voice steady. I got a message from an unknown number saying they're outside my house. They sent a picture of my home just now. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, professional. "Are you alone in the house?" I glanced around, my mind racing. Yes, my voice felt too small. I checked outside, but I don't see anyone. I gave them my address, pacing as they assured me an officer would be sent over. I kept the line open, my free hand gripping the edge of my nightstand. Another text came through. That wasn't very smart. My stomach lurched. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, trying to steady myself. The dispatcher's voice cut through my thoughts. "Stay inside, lock all doors and windows. Do not engage with the number further." I moved toward my bedroom door, hesitating before stepping into the hallway. The house was silent, but the darkness felt suffocating. I locked the front door, double-checking the deadbolt. The kitchen window was shut, the curtains drawn. I made my way back to my room, gripping my phone like a lifeline. Minutes crawled by. Every shadow felt heavier, every creak of the house amplified. Then, faintly, I heard it. The sound of my front gate creaking open. My breath hitched. The dispatcher was still on the line. "Stay put. Officers should be arriving any moment." I backed away from my window, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. My fingers gripped my phone so tightly they ached. Silence stretched on. I dared to glance outside again, but the yard was still empty. Had I imagined it? Then the motion light flicked on. My breath caught in my throat. A shadow moved just at the edge of the light's reach. Too fast to make out clearly, but there. Then it was gone. Headlights washed over my street as a patrol car pulled up. I sagged with relief as I rushed to unlock the door. 2 officers stepped out, one scanning the area with a flashlight while the other approached me. I quickly explained everything, showing them the messages in the picture. The officer's jaw tightened as he glanced toward my yard. "We'll take a look around." They checked the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the night. One of them returned a few minutes later. "No sign of anyone now, but there are footprints by your window." My stomach turned. So someone was here. The officer nodded grimly. "We'll patrol the area for a while. If you get any more messages, let us know immediately." They advised me to keep my doors locked and suggested changing my number in the morning. After they left, the house felt eerily quiet again. I locked everything twice, checking every window before retreating to my bedroom. I hesitated before looking at my phone again, dreading another message. But the screen was empty, silent. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. I kept my phone close, the police scanner app open, listening for any nearby reports. The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. By morning, I felt drained, my thoughts tangled with exhaustion and paranoia. I called my service provider first thing and changed my number. I blocked the old one, deleted the messages, and tried to shake the unease clinging to me. For the next few nights, I slept with a light on, my ears attuned to every little noise. Days passed, and nothing happened. No more messages, no more shadows at my window. But the feeling never fully went away. Somewhere out there, someone had been watching me, and whoever they were, they had known I would look. Story 25. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a coincidence. My wall clock had stopped at exactly 11:11. its hands frozen in place. I assumed the battery was dying, so I replaced it and reset the time. The next night I glanced up and saw that it had stopped again, right at 11:11. Annoyed, I checked the battery compartment, making sure everything was secure. I even bought a brand new set of batteries, convinced the ones I had used were faulty. But the next night, just as I was getting ready for bed, the clock froze again at the same time. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at it, the hands perfectly still. I decided to ignore it at first, thinking maybe the clock itself was broken. I had owned it for years, so it wasn't impossible for it to be malfunctioning. Still, something about it unsettled me. I took it down, left it on the kitchen table, and went to bed, trying not to overthink it. The following morning, I checked the clock, expecting it to be lifeless. To my surprise, it was working again, ticking away like nothing had happened. I hung it back on the wall, hoping the issue had resolved itself. That night, though, it stopped again right at